everybody, it is Dr. Kevin DeGroat. I'm one of the coaches for the Run Across Haiti, and for this purpose is for the 200 Together. And what I want to talk about today is stretching. So as of today, we are on day 4 of the 31 days in May. And if you are like most people, you get started and you are all gung-ho and you go out and do the majority of your miles in the first week, or you go and do the majority of whatever you've chosen to do for the month of May. You try to front load it, try to get ahead of the curve. You get out there, you're excited, and now is when we start to feel some of the effects of ramping up too quickly. And so Coach Matt and I talked about what are the things that we want to help you guys with over this month. And this is one of the things that we decided is we want to help keep you healthy. And stretching is one of the most common questions that I get as a physical therapist and then also as a coach. And so before we get into static versus dynamic stretching, what I want to talk to you about is the reasons that you're actually tight. Because when we start to look and think about why we're stretching in the first place, it actually starts to change the way that we're going to look at how we're going to stretch. So ultimately there are 4 reasons that you are experiencing some sort of muscular tightness or tight feeling in your body. Number 1 is you've actually had muscular shortening. This is what most people think of when they think of stretching. They think my hamstrings are tight, therefore I'm going to bend down and I'm going to stretch. I'm going to hold this position for as long as I can because I actually need to elongate my muscle. So that's number 1. That typically doesn't happen except for people who are in prolonged positions like contractures from casts or contractures from somebody being in a wheelchair, that type of thing. It takes a long time for us to actually develop true muscular shortening and contractures, but that is an option. Number 2 is some sort of a structural change. So let's look at and say you've torn something in your leg. When I was playing college soccer, I tore my right quad. And I've actually had some structural changes in my quad tissue because it had to heal itself. And so right in the middle of my quad right here, I have an indentation. So a tight feeling there could be because I've actually had my muscle tear, and because it's repaired itself, it's caused some sort of shortening. So that's number 2. Number 3 is more common than the first 2, and that's because your muscles are angry. So ultimately, this is because we're looking and saying, I'm trying to bend into a position that my body is not comfortable with or is afraid of, or I've caused tissue inflammation, I've caused some sort of issue, like the day after you run a marathon or the day after you run a 5K, you bend over like, oh, I'm tight. Most of the time, it's because your muscles are angry and or inflamed. And the last one is the lack of strength. So ultimately, when we're trying to get into a position, our brain is sitting there thinking, how am I going to keep myself safe? How am I going to keep myself upright? How am I not going to embarrass myself? So we bend over and we try to touch our toes. And we're like, oh, I'm so tight. And ultimately, for a lot of people, it's because they're not strong enough in their hamstrings to actually support themselves in a more forward fold position. So their brain says, all right, don't embarrass yourself. Don't fall on your face. I don't think that you can support yourself any further than this. So stop there. So the 3rd and the 4th reason are the most common for you. Number 3 is you've irritated something, there's inflammation, you've caused some sort of a nervous tension, or there's a lack of strength that your body's not actually able to support yourself in the positions that you're trying to get into. So when we look at those 4 things, that's when we start to look and say, what am I actually doing with stretching? Am I supposed to static stretch or am I supposed to dynamic stretch? And when we look at that, we say, okay, the 3rd and the 4th reason, the angry muscles and the lack of strength, are the most common things for me. So then if I'm going to just static stretch and I'm going to bend down and touch my toes, am I actually calming things down? Am I telling my brain, it's okay to be in that position, or if by stretching and just holding that position, am I actually irritating things more? Or do I have the potential to irritate things more? As opposed to doing more of a dynamic, like a leg kick movement, am I actually facilitating my body's response to that and saying, oh, this actually doesn't hurt too bad. This doesn't feel too bad. It doesn't feel too threatening. And so when we're especially getting started with running as a warm-up, almost always, we want to do more dynamic stretching because it helps facilitate our bodies calming down and letting us actually get into the positions of running. So whether that's stretching our quads or hip flexors or hamstrings or calves, whatever that is, it's slowly increasing the amount of range of motion or amount of mobility that we're going through. And as our brain starts to warm up, or as our body starts to warm up, we get into further range of motion, as opposed to just sitting, stretching as far as possible. And it's like taking a rubber band, you're stretching it as far as you can and just holding it there. A rubber band is going to respond better to continued back and forth than it is to just pull it and hold it. So your muscles are the same way. So again, the purpose of stretching is almost always to decrease irritation and to slowly facilitate strengthening into those positions. And so we want to do more on the dynamic end of the spectrum as opposed to the static end of the spectrum, because ultimately the tension that we're experiencing is not because of muscle shortening, it's because your nerves are irritated or you're not strong enough, and we need to facilitate those positions as opposed to just forcing us into something that we're uncomfortable with. If you have questions, don't hesitate to comment on this video or reach out to me on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, whatever it is. We would love to answer your questions. If you have follow-up questions, if you have any other questions that we can answer through the month of May, I'd be happy to do that. Coach Matt would be happy to do that. Just drop a message or get in touch with one of us and we'd be happy to help.